filter. I can't see very well, anybody, but it's very nice to be here, and thanks very much to Marie and to Laura for inviting me. My name's Lauren Moffatt. I'm an artist originally from Australia, but I'm now living mostly in Valencia in Spain and also part-time in Berlin in Germany, where I'm attending a residency right now with KIKK to produce some new work. For my presentation today, I'm going to speak really specifically about the way that I achieve and the motivation behind wanting to achieve certain types of surface textures and certain types of glitches and digital noise in my work. To give a little bit of background maybe that's relevant to this, I grew up in quite a remote part of northern New South Wales, so same state as Sydney but further north in the mountains, about halfway between Sydney and Brisbane. And when I was older, of course, like I went to high school in the nearest city and attended university in Sydney and so on, but when I was a child, most of the time I was quite isolated with my family in the middle of nature. And I felt very connected with nature and with this kind of place that I was free to roam in as a child. And later, when I started going to school and so on, I realized that it was actually much more difficult to connect with other humans than it was to connect with other species, non-human species. And it was kind of this feeling of being on like all of my senses being kind of connected to what was surrounding me. And the way that these days I try and communicate that to other people, to kind of share the way that I see things, is by trying to make really dense, really particular types of surface qualities that allow people to almost reach out with their gaze and kind of touch as if their eyes were hands, or if their gaze actually had the sense of touch to it, the surface of things that are appearing in 3D worlds. So this is what led me to get interested in stereoscopic media. This is a short film, a short experimental film that I made in 2013. It's a stereoscopic work, so you would normally watch it with polarized glasses on a 3D display. And the story in this film is this woman kind of creates this helmet to protect herself from the gaze of others, either human eyes or human eyes amplified by surveillance cameras and so on. She creates this kind of modified welding helmet with cameras sort of hidden inside that then film back outwards in order to sort of fight back against this invasive gaze that she feels. And for this piece, I really wanted to kind of have people penetrating into the image with their eyes, the same way that she feels the gaze coming towards her. And so in order to do this, I was kind of working with as much texture as possible. So for the helmet itself, I sort of scraped it a little bit so that it had some extra surface qualities. With her hair, we sort of made it messy. We chose special clothes and special things that were happening in the scene in order to help people shift their eyes in the different depths. And then we shot the part that we just saw, we shot with a kind of professional stereoscopic rig, which you see actually in this image. This is a part close to the end of the film where she puts on the helmet and all of a sudden she's kind of in control of the image, and she's also takes control of the story in a way. So this man who's off camera, who you don't see up until this moment, who was previously kind of interviewing / interrogating her about this helmet, is now in her view and looks quite small and feels like quite vulnerable to her gaze. And then she's kind of, from this moment on, she's the one who's sort of driving the narrative. She's in charge of this narrative. And in each step, like the sort of 3D pulls you in more and more. And in this scene, the 3D kind of goes almost to the horizon because of this tunnel where we shot this film. This part was shot, well, the whole piece was made in Tourcoing. It was a project from the Frenois, and this part was shot in the driverless train in the Lille Metropole. This was the next work that I made after, which I kind of took this idea of digital noise, which I was playing with the GoPro material from the helmet a lot, and kind of explored it further. On the technical side, there was also a conceptual reason for making this piece, but kind of blending different types of celluloid, like digitized analog material, as well as kind of the pixelation and artifacts that happen in digital compression, and kind of putting this into a 3D. It was also a stereoscopic 3D work, and so all of this noise is sort of appearing in depth, and kind of inviting the gaze to sort of like dance between the different depths in the image, rather than just scanning from left to right or from down to up. This one I put in the presentation. It was the first VR work that I made, and it was also the origin of a lot of the techniques that I use now, and especially it was when I reintroduced painting into my work. It was actually a documentary piece, a documentary VR piece, which was about a mural that's in a building in Liverpool. It's very significant for the trade union movement in the north of England. But for this piece, in order to kind of I wanted to make a 3D archive. So I used a lot of archive material. I also created my own material. I used photogrammetry. I used point cloud capture in order to kind of create this space for preserving this story, because this space was about to disappear. And from there, I kind of began getting really interested in kind of collaborating a little bit with both with physical material, kind of the imperfection of the physical, as well as the types of glitches that happen when you use software the wrong way in order to kind of express myself, because I started finding that there was something that really resonated with me when things would go slightly wrong, you know. So this was the next piece that kind of took all of that and put it in a different context. This piece is more of an environment than a narrative, and it was also the first time that I started playing with painting UV maps. So on the right-hand side is the UV map, which is what is used by whatever software is kind of visualizing the 3D model to tell it what color should appear at any point on the surface. And it works like a map in the sense that there are coordinates all over the map that correspond with parts of the geometry. And when I made these kind of sculptures that you see suspended in the space on the left-hand side, there's another video that's coming up next that shows this a little bit closer up. When I made these reconstructions in the photogrammetry software, it gave me a photo UV, so something that's supposed to be photorealistic. And then I made a painting of that and then digitized the painting and then switched the two files, which is what gives these sculptures this kind of painterly effect. And in the video that I'm about to show, it's also from a version where if you touch the pieces in a certain way, the photo material begins to appear for a second, so you can see a little bit the difference between the painting and the piece. You can also hear that there's some music playing. For this work, I worked with a Lille-based musician, sound artist called Constantin Dubois. His artist name is Ressin. And he helped me to make sound signatures for each of these sculptures. So if you pick them up and put them close to your ear, you'll hear the specific sound that makes. When you first arrive in this space, they're kind of encircling you, and because it's a spatialized sound piece, you need to kind of turn your head to be able to hear all of them one by one. But if you build them all into one space, it sort of creates its own type of soundscape. And then there's also this aspect to it that if you touch these sculptures in given ways, you know, there are certain rules about how this will happen, then they will shatter and kind of, you know, shatter into the space in a kind of this zero gravity kind of environment. And then after that, you can't manipulate them anymore. And actually, once they all break, the piece resets, and that's kind of the whole piece. So in a way, it works a little bit like an instrument, or perhaps like a sound composition software with parameters that are set by me. But yeah, this was the next kind of step in this kind of trajectory about trying to really make these textures sort of vibrate in this way that I feel that I perceive when I perceive things, you know. I don't really feel like I see things as if it's a photo. Like I don't feel like photorealism is realism. It's something else. This one I put in to show a little bit how people move, or how this specific person was moving when they were interacting with the previous piece. This was also kind of a key moment with this artwork, because it's when I kind of realized that making a VR work, an interactive VR work, people actually experience the story with their whole body. And each person has their own really specific way of encountering it. And it really highlights how different people's experiences are. And I think that it's also something really, really interesting that I'm still kind of working on and still investigating, you know, how to help the visitor to sort of perform the story or perform the space in a way. There's something quite beautiful, I think, about that compared to media that's sort of passive, where you sort of sit and watch it until the end, and there's a transformation that happens in your mind. There's some sort of transformation, or as you think about it later on. But in the case of immersive media, you really move through it, and I think that there's something quite beautiful about that. So this was the next work, which was kind of, I think I started it before the previous one was finished, but it took a long time to finish it. I think that it was around 3 years. This piece is called Image Technology Echoes. In the work, you enter this gallery space where we are now, and there are these two characters who are looking at a painting of a stormy ocean, or a stormy sea. And they're having this really weird conversation about it. You know, like if you get close to them, you can hear them, what they're saying, and it sort of seems very strange. You don't know whether they're actually really talking about something else and not talking about the painting at all, or whether they're just really uncomfortable with each other, or they just had an argument or something. And then if you step closely enough to one of these characters, you get transported into their mind space. So for instance, now we're in the character of the man. And in each case, the mind space is like a room that's filled with objects and texts and different elements that also have their own behaviors. And they each has their own behaviors and so on. And from these spaces, you also see how each of them sees the painting from a completely different perspective. You know, they see completely different paintings, actually. In the case of the man, he's seeing this writing kind of appearing everywhere. He doesn't see any forms in the picture. It's just sort of an abstract blue canvas. And in the case of the woman, she's sort of actually surrounded by the painting. And you realize that in this conversation outside, she's actually sort of drifted away somewhere. You know, she kind of sails around the room a little bit, and she's at different parts of the gallery, and she's not even actually hearing him. And so with this, I was kind of interested in turning this perception, this idea of perception and the different ways that people see, into an architecture, and also into a kind of using the bodies of these characters as an interface in order to get to the next part of the story, or to move around to the different parts of this architecture. And I also kind of continued in this idea about using different types of 3D files, using different types of, you know, kind of physical objects or physical drawings or elements that I create myself in the physical world, and then digitizing them and also transforming them slightly as they move into the digital. So this is like kind of an overview of different types of things that this might have included. I'll go into a couple of them in detail in a moment, but for instance, the painting itself, it's about this big in real life, but in the VR, it's giant. It's sort of more like 2 meters by 2 meters. So the tiny little brush strokes sort of turn into these big, expressive, splashy strokes. There are some in the bottom central square of the grid. You see that there's this kind of ape paper mache sculpture that is looking at this kind of computer screen that I painted these orchid heads on. And when in the piece, when you get close to, like, it's an example of some of the hidden things, like the kind of invisible things that you need to you need to delve into and find inside some of the scenes. So if you get close enough, then her head sort of opens up and you see these orchid heads dancing inside. I also, with this one, I started to play a little bit with other types of maps, not just UV maps. This is an example of playing around with another type of map that's called a normal map. And it's often used in video games for kind of faking geometry. It's a way to have something that doesn't have a very complex mesh look like it's got quite a lot more detail on it, by kind of having the software interpret the different colors. So on the far right-hand side, that's the final normal map that appears on a part. This was used for the woman's internal perspective of the painting. And so I had the original image, and then I made a painting as if I were making a normal map, as if I were a computer making this normal map, which is the central image. And then I gave this to the software, but it always transforms it itself, because it's still not, even though I use the same kind of palette, the same type of colors that appear in these files, the computer still can't understand it as a normal map unless it's really got these 4 different values. There are 4 different colors that appear in these maps in order to tell the software how to interpret the light that's hitting that surface. But it was a way to kind of express, because I feel quite moved by that there are all of these images that the computer is seeing, or that the software is seeing behind the scenes. Like we don't realize that there are all of these. There's this whole language that the computer uses in order to show us the final result. And there's something quite poetic about that, I think, and also something that allows me to communicate in a funny way with the computer in order to tell it how to get this type of surface that I'm looking for. And in this case, this appears also in the woman's interior space. This is a completely different type of map. It comes more from the art therapy side of things. Sometimes in art therapy, people are invited to kind of visualize their inner state. And it could be really literal, like, there'll be a human body traced out, and, you need to fill it with colors and shapes based on where you're feeling different emotions, or it's sometimes used in therapy for people who are experiencing chronic pain in order to visualize the pain and kind of make it objective. The idea is to make it objective, like kind of make it something that's outside of you, It's kind of like taking this thing that's engulfing you, this thing that you're immersed in, and then making it as if you're looking at it from an aeroplane. So making it feel like it's not something that's got hold of you. That's the sort of logic behind it. In this work, I kind of got into the character of this this woman character from the piece, and kind of created this as if I was creating her anxiety. I wasn't actually feeling super anxious at that time. I was sort of, kind of creating it as if I was her. And this is her kind of anxiety map, because she's actually, you find out in this piece that she's actually quite an anxious person. And then also, as I was working on this piece, I began another different piece, which is actually really important for a lot of what I'll talk about after. I'm just going to put the sound up as well so that you can hear a little bit what the soundscape's like. This piece is called Of Hybrids and Strings. It was actually originally called Flowers for Suzanne Clare, but because as I worked on this piece, it started to get bigger and bigger, and then it wasn't possible to contain it inside just this VR world. It sort of turned into a universe that this VR world was just a small part of. This piece was called Of Hybrids and Strings, and the greater world is now called Flowers for Suzanne Clare. In this piece, you're kind of in this forest landscape. You can move around a little bit. You've only got hands that you can see, but then there's a character that's sort of following your every movement. And gradually, all of these strings appear that are connecting different nodes in this ecosystem with one another. And then they form a scaffold that this crystal moves across. And the reason for the crystals and the reason for the Suzanne Claire is because this was a project that sort of began as a bit of a speculative fiction about missing voices from science fiction. I was thinking a lot about how the books that I really loved from like 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s science fiction, most of them were white men. There weren't so many women. The women who did get published are amazing, of course, but it wasn't like it was a very good split. And it made me wonder if there weren't so many marginalized voices at that time, if it was more of an equal conversation, whether we would have better ideas for how to innovate with the crises that we're going through now, you know, because often science fiction becomes science fact. You know, science fiction writers dream up things and then scientists become inspired to try and make them happen. And Suzanne Claire is a sort of secondary character in a book called The Crystal World by, I should also mention, because right now we can hear the sound a little bit, Antoine Bertin, who I think is also here, did the soundscape for this work, which is also a very beautiful, like, extra layer to this piece. Yeah, the Suzanne Claire is like a secondary character who's sort of derided a little bit, because in this piece, like, there's a sort of in this book, there's an apocalypse happening because the world is slowly being consumed by this kind of crystal material, like everything's turning to crystal. And everybody else is kind of feeling really glum about this, and basically everybody's doesn't really know what to do, and they've all kind of given up. But she's kind of derided a little bit because she sees this as an opportunity for something else, for a different type of being, for a way to kind of become more unified with the surroundings. And I found it, so in a sense, this is almost like a piece of fan fiction, because I felt like I really wanted to see this whole world that was happening through her eyes and have a whole book that was written about with Suzanne Claire as the protagonist. And that was the sort of point of departure for this work. But also in the process of making all of these flower assets that I needed for this work, I kind of came across this kind of technique for preparing flower assets in different streamlines, like both sort of optimized for AR and VR worlds, like the flowers that you see in this piece, as well as higher resolution geometry for videos and pre-rendered images. So these are just a few slides to really go into a bit of detail about how this happens. On the left-hand side is the original photo set that I made of this lily flower, like one of the flowers that I use. Depending on the mood that I'm in and the type of flower it is, I'll sometimes just make a very, very small photo set. Sometimes I'll make a deliberately huge photo set. And sometimes I'll just make a really quick couple of passes. Like, I think that this one was on my way to work one day. I didn't have much time, and so I just did a quick pass over. You can see in this right-hand side at the top, this is in the photogrammetry software that reconstructs the flower. You can see the shape of the movement that I did in order to make that photo set in these each of those blue little texts is one image. So that's the reconstructed flower. And then on the bottom right-hand side, that's kind of an image that I make with a virtual camera of the flower from one angle. So I put the 3D model into a 3D software, and then I make this image of it. And then the next step is that I paint that image. So on the right-hand side here, you have the painting that I made of this image. In the next slide, so this is just to show a little bit how different this can be between different assets. Like on the right-hand side, that's kind of a sequence of some different photo sets that I made. And on the left-hand side, some different paintings. So you see sometimes I'm painting them really big. Sometimes they're very small. Sometimes I put a lot of paint and a lot of time and a few layers into it. Sometimes I just do it really fast. It sort of is a little bit of an instinctual thing. It's also, sometimes I don't have as much time as others, so it sort of just happens by accident. But yeah, this is just to show how different this can be from the example that I just showed. And then the next step is to make this UV projection. So as I was talking about UVs before, you can also kind of tell in a 3D modeling software, you can tell the software how you want the UV to be working. And there's one option in Maya, but you can also do this in Blender, where you can make a kind of a camera projection. And so I make this same camera angle with a virtual camera, and then I tell the UV editor that I want to make a camera projection UV map. And then it's not always the case. Here I also did some work to clean it up. So what happens is if you are projecting with a beamer, like with a light projector, projecting an image of a flower onto that same flower, like whatever is perpendicular to the light will kind of lose resolution, like the resolution will be pulled along whatever is kind of adjacent. And whatever is behind will be in shadow. In this case, it won't be in shadow, it'll just get the same texture that's on the geometry in front of it. So here, for instance, I needed to, like some of the stamens got projected onto the petal, and then I was kind of cleaning up this part of the UV map so it just looked like petal material. And then this is an example, so this is this same asset appearing in a video work from earlier this year. So you see, and it's often I'll kind of throw them all in, kind of like a 3D collage with a lot of other material. And in this case, I leave all of this noise, all of this kind of 3D static that happens at the kind of margins of the photo set, you know, that you'll start to have this sort of dust that appears, and different parts of, you know, different other plants that somehow make it into the image and so on. They kind of create something like this 3D noise again, kind of something that gives the eyes something to grab onto. This is just another example. It's another video also from earlier this year. And then this is an example of the other kind of pipeline for these assets, where I do need to optimize them because I want to work with them in mobile environments or in VR environments, where performance is a big question, and so everything needs to have as little geometry as possible in order to allow it to run smoothly and render in real time. This is a piece called Contre-Plongée. It was commissioned for the Palais Augmenté festival from last year. And this is kind of using all of these different assets that I collected, and then I re-topologized them. So I kind of redrew all of the triangles back over, you know, the original really high fidelity mesh. Or sometimes, depending on what kind of effect I want, I might use the kind of automatic reduced polygon function in my software, which will sometimes it will just kind of give more of it'll give a different edges to things, I suppose. It gives it, and it also does different things to this kind of static that's around, and that can sometimes be interesting as well. So now I'm just going to talk, this is the last work that I want to talk about, and it's something that's still ongoing, actually. It's a kind of world building, it's an experimental world building, collective world building project. I invited, and it kind of links back to the body mapping that I was speaking about before. So I invited a group of women to undergo a kind of body mapping meditation. They didn't have to draw. They just sort of got comfortable, and then I sort of guided them into this meditation where they needed to visualize their inner state as if it were a landscape. So this would be their emotional state, but also physiological things like if they are hot or cold, or if they, you know, have an itch somewhere, or if they have pain somewhere, or if they feel like they need to wash their hair, that they would kind of turn all of these different elements into landscape elements, and then describe them to me. And then I took their descriptions and worked with a kind of text to image AI in order to get the original kind of sketches for all of the assets that I needed to create for this world. And then I made paintings of those and kind of had a bit of a back and forth with this kind of AI collaborator who is there essentially in order to keep me from being too biased, I suppose. Like it's somebody, like it's kind of an objective collaborator. This is actually the prototype version from earlier this year. It's already been through another couple of iterations since then in the versions since, and gained some more characters and some more details in this world, which I'm going to show in this video. With this work, I needed to work with a reduced number of maps. Like I needed to have a lot of assets using the same texture map. And so what I did was actually paint directly with the UV coordinates. So in the UV editor that we saw earlier with the flower, I would kind of grab a UV coordinate and then pull it down to kind of create this, these kind of lines that you see on these characters. And this also kind of, oh, there's also a little bit of sound on that, but it's okay. Yeah, this was my way of kind of making these characters becoming out of the landscape and also kind of have this collective thing working as well at the same time as being able to optimize the space, because it's quite a big work, and there's a lot of there are a lot more things that I want to add to it. So I want to kind of make sure that I can put as much as possible, and that means that I need to think about this performance side of things, which I quite enjoy, actually. I find it kind of a fun part of having to work within certain limitations. Yeah, this one in the center, it's somebody who was talking about how they felt a flower that was growing in their chest. So there's this kind of flower that grows out of this character's chest. The one on the left is talking, like this is some crabs that she sees on the beach, and she's wearing red boots and so on. Like people went into quite a lot of detail, so it was quite fun, and it was also interesting to work with this AI because it sort of, the stuff that it gave me was actually quite different from what I was imagining, but it was also very interesting. It was a good depiction of what the person was saying. These are just some details from one of the characters that we just saw, the one in the balloon. So you can see up close a little bit more what I was talking about, how there's this kind of really geometric lines at the edges. So what I would have done you can see it best on the right-hand side, is I would have selected this part of the UV coordinates and then just pulled them to a darker part of the map in order to create like a darker, kind of more dramatic part around the eyes, so you can identify the kind of structure of her face better from far away. And these are a couple more characters with the same. With the one on the right, there's a lot of kind of patchwork work, and it's sort of got a huge amount of detail on it, even though it's quite small, which is why also I made these special kind of renders of some of the characters, because there are some things that is very difficult to even see on the small scale that it is. And the next step is I would really like to adapt this work for VR, and I think that that's something that's probably going to begin to happen later this year. And that's pretty much everything that I prepared. I'm really, again, very happy to have been here and to be able to share this part of my work with you. In case anybody didn't understand anything or so on, please come to me later on and ask me. I'll be very happy to answer any questions. And I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the presentations. Thanks very much.